Minnesota is the talk of the internet right now, and it's not because of its Scandinavian heritage. Or is it? It seems like the Minnesota politicians are just as accepting of Somalian and immigrant fraud as Scandinavian politicians are, and that's just the top of the iceberg. It seems as if Minnesota is the case study we never knew we had on what happens when a large number of people take their mindset and their culture and relocate to a different location. And the best of all, it's a 176-year-long case study of mass migration. Minnesota has one of the strongest Scandinavian heritages in the United States, largely due to mass migration from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark in the 19th and early 20th century. The state is home to the largest populations of Norwegians and Swedish outside of Europe, with significant Danish influence as well, mind you. The first Scandinavians arrived in Minnesota in 1850. The first Norwegian settlement was Norwegian Ridge in what is now Spring Grove in Houston County, often dated 1851 to 52. This is considered the first permanent Scandinavian settlement in Minnesota. Other early Norwegian areas include Goodhue County and Fillmore, Houston counties from the mid-1850s. Swedes arrived shortly after. The first Swedish settlement settled in Scandia, which is Washington County. The Chisago Lakes area received Swedish settlers in 1851, and it quickly became a center for Swedish settlements. The Danes immigrated around the same time in early 1850s. Often it's linked to religious groups such as Mormons and Baptists, but on a smaller scale than the Norwegians and the Swedes initially. Now, why does this matter? Well, in light of recent events, it shows that culture and collective mindset matters. So what happened in Minnesota has happened in Scandinavia for years already. Did you know that nearly 11 million Norwegian aid kroner were sent to Somalia to provide beauty therapist education for young people at risk of turning to piracy? To everyone's great surprise, yes, by the way, you heard that right, they wanted to turn pirates into estheticians. So millions were embezzled through systematic fraud. Surprise, surprise. Nora demanded repayment of 4.7 million kroners from the Norwegian church aid, and the rest has just vanished without a trace. The Norwegian Police Security Service could not rule out that some of the money might have ended up funding terrorism. Not that the Norwegian government cares, because they fund terrorism anyway. Who in their right mind thought that pirates would choose to become beauticians rather than loot and defraud? And come to think of it, who in Somalia would have used this service? Who would have money to go to all these newfound estheticians when it's such a poor country? But don't mind that. That's a whole different type of mentality, is it not? It's the Scandinavian one. There is something about the people themselves, you see, both Scandinavian and Somalians, and the origin of a culture isn't irrelevant. It has everything to do with values and attitudes. And Scandinavians and Somalians together, they equal a disaster. Scandinavians always assume that everybody else is great and they're the best and they wish us well, and super naive, basically. And they obviously do the same in Minnesota. In Sweden, there's a saying that you're Swedish the second that you have ridden the subway. In Norway, you're Norwegian the second you put your foot on Norwegian soil, apparently. And in fact, immigrants are more Norwegian than the native Norwegians because all of our culture, well, we just appropriated all of our culture, basically. Cheers to Scandinavian Airlines.
What is truly Scandinavian?
Grattis!
Absolutely nothing.
Nada.
Niente.
There is no such thing.
Everything is copied. Our
Vi
democracy,
människor som tillsammans formar framtiden.
credit goes to Greece. parental leave,
Thank you, Switzerland.
the iconic Scandinavian windmills were actually invented in Persia. And we made the German bicycle a staple of our cities.
Hvem er rugbrød?
It's Turkish,
What?
Smørbrød?
Dutch,
What about licorice?
it's Chinese, and
Midsommarstången? German.
And it gets worse.
rumor has it the oh-so-Swedish meatballs might not be as Swedish as you think, but Turkish.
Even the Danish isn't Danish.
It's Austrian. And the pride of Norway, the paperclip, was actually invented by an American.
And while we're at it,
America, thank you for taking the first steps
in empowering the women's rights movement.
We're no better.
Than our Viking ancestors.
We take everything we like on our trips abroad, adjust it a little bit, and
Voila!
And we have no special claim to our nation either. Cheers to former Norwegian Prime Minister and UN Sustainable Development Goal leader Erna Solberg.
Because I think there's a very big difference between US and Canada, who are immigrant countries, and countries like Norway and probably Austria and others who have, people have been living there for tens and thousands of years. But I think we have the same core. The same core is that if you believe in your Western ideas, you should believe that everybody is equal, that you don't have any special rights because your parents have been living here forever.
What happened to the Vikings, you may ask? Well, Harald Bluetooth unified and Christianized Denmark, though he wasn't exactly a devoted Christian himself. Harald Fairhair unified Norway, while Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson Christianized it. In Sweden, it was Olof Skottkonung, who is regarded as the first Christian king, who made Christianity the state religion, and around year 1000. The Vikings were tamed by Christianity long before the Humanist Association and feminists got to work undermining the foundations in which our three nations were built upon. When faith no longer binds a community together, clan culture takes over. And in our case, these are the clans. It's the LGBTQ plus clan, the radical feminist clan, the climate clan, the BLM clan, and of course, the Islam clan, and the people who hate themselves clan. Cult-like group thinking is strong in Scandinavia, but the main problem is that the rules aren't the same for everyone anymore. Certain groups get special privileges, and it's not the white ones, it's the Muslims and the gender-confused individuals. This paves the way for fraud scandals because they get a free pass. Now, we know the single mother fraud is still going on, and I'll get to that in a second, but everyone pretends it's not, just like with Tim Walz in Minnesota. They don't want to know about it. They know about it, but they don't want to know about it. So now, what about the Somalians? They are still pirating wherever they go. Somehow, they've put their main bet on the castrated Vikings, both in Europe and in the United States. Who wouldn't be tempted to rob a ship when they're invited on to take whatever they want? So let's step back and look at the full picture and dive into the welfare fraud scandals involving immigrant communities, particularly Somalians, starting with Norway. The year is 2011. Norwegian birth rates are declining, yet Somalian immigrants claiming to be divorced keep having children with their so-called ex-husbands. Over half of the children at the time were registered as born out of wedlock. Pretty normal in Islam, wouldn't you say? Which is also why Norway's welfare agency flagged it as a potential fraud indicator, and authorities discovered that at least 100 Somalian families defrauded around 800,000 Norwegian kroners each, equivalent to about 70,000 euros. They did this in single-parent allowances, transitional benefits, and child support. We still hear stories from the maternity ward that the fraud is ongoing, and imagine what those numbers would be today after 15 years. Why haven't anyone done anything about it? Well, nobody wants to go on the record, which is probably one of the many reasons that Norway don't have these large exposees as Sweden does, which we will get back to in a few moments. But Norway also faces significant outflows of money through the Hawala systems. And during a 2023 investigation, they revealed that 36 billion Norwegian kroner, so that is about 3.1 billion euros, in Norwegian banknotes were likely smuggled out of the country. And this happened between 2018 and 2022. This figure comes from the Gap, so only 4.3 billion Norwegian kroners were legally declared exported, but 40.2 billion Norwegian kroners returned via bank, indicating undeclared outflows. In 2024, nearly 2.8 billion Norwegian kroners, that is about 244 million euros, were sent abroad via registered services such as Western Union. You want to guess who the top recipients were? Take a guess. Yes, you are correct. Somalia. They sent 362 million Norwegian kroners out of the country back to Somalia. 362 million Norwegian kroners. Afghanistan, the Afghans sent 353 million to Afghanistan. These groups often receive the majority of Norway's social benefits. Official statistics show a clear overrepresentation. In 2023, foreign-born residents, that's about 18 to 19% of the time, some say 20, 21 of the population, received 69% of all economical social assistance. Non-Western migrants, particularly from Africa and Asia, including Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Eritrea, dominate long-term welfare dependency. Groups sending the largest numbers abroad, Somalis and Afghans, are among those with the highest welfare usage and lowest employment. Yet, as we've seen, Somalis in Norway sent 362 million Norwegian kroners legally abroad in 2024. Afghans sent 353 million Norwegian kroners. That's the highest per person average, by the way. This creates a stark reality. Norwegian taxpayers fund generous benefits to support not only the families that are here, but entire clans abroad. Entire clans we support with our taxpayer money. That's great. Well, we can't keep the light on. Elderly are freezing. Schools are being put down, basically, abolished. But this we have money for. Then there's the aid. Norway spent nearly 500 years as a subordinate province under the Danish and Swedish rule. That does things to a nation. It fractures confidence, erodes sovereignty, and trains elites to ask for permission rather than take responsibility. And then we struck oil. Overnight, this poor nation became obscenely wealthy. But wealth does not automatically produce self-respect. Instead of rebuilding a nation of confidence, Norway developed a particular form of inherited inferiority complex, rich in cash, but poor in courage. The result is visible everywhere. Our politicians cannot make a decision nationally without consulting Brussels, and they refuse to engage internationally without first seeking moral absolution from the United Nations. We behave like a country still afraid of being left out, desperate to be liked, and like governing and sovereignty is just something slightly embarrassing. That's probably how Norway ended up funding salaries for Somali government employees in Somalia in 2013 as part of efforts to rebuild state institutions after decades of conflict. Is the conflict over yet, by the way? No? No. In 2025, Norway is giving 45 million, that's approximately 4.5 million US dollars, to Somalia Joint Fund Human Rights and Gender Window trying to de-Sharia Somalia, basically by giving women their rights, which is ironic as the Somalians are here Shariaizing Norway. Yes, I made up a word. It is Shariaizing. Islamization is not Shariaizing is the correct word. Sweden, on the other hand, is often presented as a different case. A worse case, shall I say. Different politics, different model, but it's really not. Norway is just copying Sweden with a delay, so we're ending up in the same destination anyway. Sweden emerges as one of the clearest examples of organized, ideological-driven welfare exploitation. And in November 2025, Expressen published an extensive investigation revealing 2 interconnected Muslim Salafist networks operating through schools, preschools, and shell companies. The investigation exposed an Islamist network largely involving Somali individuals, draining over 1 billion Swedish kroners. That's about 87 million euros from taxpayer funds for schools and preschools, tied family bonds, criminal dealings, and welfare crimes, and key figures such as former moderate party MP, I'm going to butcher his name, Abdisadak Vaberi, and he siphoned 12 million Swedish kroners, that's 1 million euros, via fake IT invoices, funding sex clubs in Thailand, luxury hotels, and his Islamist party in Somalia. His Islamist party in Somalia, a Swedish MP or former Swedish MP with an Islamist party in his home nation. What does that tell you? Other players, including imams, Abu Rad and Abdel Nasser el-Nadi, funneled millions to extremist causes while employing ISIS returnees. Great idea to bring those people back to our nations where they don't belong. The network left 33 million Swedish kroners, that's 2.9 million euros, in unpaid taxes. Shocker, because they just stole tax money, but okay. As they fled to Egypt and Turkey. And what's more sad, the saddest thing of all is that this school scandal isn't even the full story. Beyond education, Sweden is facing a massive and expanding wave of welfare fraud in the healthcare and care sectors, particularly in personal assistant compensation, home care services, and primary care centers. According to Swedish authorities, organized networks systematically exploit vulnerable systems by billing for services never performed, exaggerating care needs, falsifying time reports, charging while beneficiaries are abroad, and employing relatives in fraudulent arrangements. The cost runs into the billions of kroners annually, and a 2024 report from Försäkringskassan shows a clear and persistent pattern. Foreign-born individuals are overrepresented in nearly all categories of intentional benefit fraud. In personal assistance compensation, initial errors are up to 8 times more common among foreign-born than native-born Swedes. Authorities explicitly identify clan-based and family networks as key risk factors. They also operate within home care of the elderly, in hemtjänsten and HVB homes. Police and prosecutors report increasingly infiltration by criminal networks. Common methods include such things as billing for fictitious hours, exploiting elderly and cognitively impaired patients, using care companies as money laundering vehicles, and the Ekobrottsmyndigheten and police, that being Ekobrottsmyndigheten is being the economic crime unit, they warn that this trend is accelerating, not declining. And on top of that, elderly ladies are being raped in their homes. We will get back to that in a different episode, by the way. Another particularly alarming development has emerged since the early 2020s. Gang criminals are not only establishing primary care centers, but vaccination clinics. Yes, you heard that right. Why? Because welfare fraud is now less risky than drug trafficking, more profitable, and harder to detect. And according to Ekobrottsmyndigheten and police briefings to Sveriges Radio Ekot, which is a Swedish radio, You probably understood that. Clinics overbill for treatments, prescribe narcotics illegally, they launder criminal proceeds through healthcare reimbursements, and yet this is nothing new. Since the early 2010s, large-scale welfare fraud cases in Holland and Södertälje involved networks exaggerating disabilities to extract millions in assistance payments. The school scandals revealed organized exploitation at the top, but Sweden's welfare problems doesn't stop with networks and institutions. It also shows up plainly and publicly at the individual level. A case that sparked national outrage was published by Expressen in 2021. Although not necessarily fraud all over in the legal sense, taxpayers feel defrauded when hearing about people like Shukri Mohammed Hassan, a Somali refugee arrived in Sweden 8 years earlier with 3 children and just 4 years of elementary education from Somalia. She remained unemployed for years. During that time, she gave birth to 6 additional children, divorced her husband, a commonly used tactic to maximize welfare payouts, as you're well aware. Her monthly disposable income from social programs amounted to 32,000 Swedish kroners. That's approximately 2,784 euros per month. In addition, the taxpayer covered rent for 5-bedroom apartment costing about 15,000 Swedish kroners, that's 1,305 euros a month. Altogether, her household was supported at a level well above the income of many working families. Hassan described Sweden simply as a good country. Sweden currently has 190,000 long-term unemployed and an annual taxpayer cost of 36 billion. That's about 3.1 billion euros per year. According to official data, the vast majority of the long-term unemployment are non-European migrants. This is the background against which organized welfare fraud operates. And according to Anna Solberg, when immigrants send money back to their countries of origin, this is global equalization. So let's be honest about what that actually means. What Scandinavia is practicing is global socialism, the export of welfare financed by domestic taxpayers, justified with the kind of moral language that usually circulates in the dark corners of Davos. It's safe to assume that the idea was imported, not invented. Once this framework is accepted, though, everything follows logically. If poverty abroad is the moral justification, then fraud at home becomes tolerable. Welfare abuse is no longer theft, it's redistribution, and Somali migrants and others are effectively told that exploiting the system is understandable, even virtuous, because the places they come from, they are poor. It turns the welfare state from a social contract into an open-ended global charity with no mandate, no limits, and no accountability. And if given the option, I'm pretty sure that the Norwegian state would have jumped at the opportunity to throw money at the Leering Center in Minnesota. Minnesota, Norway, and Sweden all have something to learn from the nation of the oldest monarchy in Europe, Denmark. In 2018, a 30-year-old Somali man was remanded in custody for extensive fraud against the Danish social services. He allegedly submitted fake applications for funding for projects such as rehabilitation for drug addicts and traumatized refugees. And he swindled about 4.5 million Danish kroners by using his forged documents. There have also been several documented cases where Somali asylum seekers have lied about family relationships in order to obtain residency permits or family reunification, which is widely seen as exploiting the system. Like in Norway, there is also a general overrepresentation in Denmark. Somali immigrants and their descendants are overrepresented in crime statistics overall, for example, in violent crime, robbery, and in property offenses, including fraud. However, there are no large-scale systematic welfare fraud scandals specifically linked to Somalis on the same level as those in Minnesota or in Sweden. Denmark has stricter controls and immigration policies than Sweden and Norway, and even the United States at least used to, which probably limits the scopes of such issues. And there are also fewer people of Danish descent in Minnesota, so perhaps Minnesota was just a little bit unlucky in that regard. But on the other hand, the United States has reinstated law and order under the Trump administration. And that's probably why, well, we know that's why, agencies are executing search warrants and ICE are hunting down illegals and fraudsters are being caught. Terrorist states are on travel ban. The US can teach us that it's never too late to push the pirates off the boat and turn it around. Or at least I hope so. We need more Kash Patels, Elon Musks, and Donald Trumps in this world, and less of the Keir Starmers and Jonas Gahr Støre. They could have probably been twin in character. And please, let's turn it around. Let's expose the fraud. Plaster it everywhere on X, because that's what they don't want you to do. You could have seen a pattern like I just showed you.